So you are then be vigilant about self-image arising, self-esteem, self-worth. Now, on the conventional level, self-esteem or self-worth are derived from the way in which you relate to society that you live in, to a large extent, certain things that you may have achieved or that you may possess, or in some traditional cultures, your sense of self-worth is to do with your ancestors. Not so much in the Western world, and certainly much less in so-called new countries like United States or Australia or Canada. In the new countries, your ancestors are not that important for as far as your sense of identity is concerned. But in older cultures, your sense of identity and sense of self-worth is sometimes to a large extent derived from your ancestors. And even if you have achieved nothing, and you can have a high sense of self-worth because your great-grandfather and the ones before and before and before and before, they have achieved great things in the eyes of the world. Perhaps it means they just killed more people than anybody else. And finally they became, the king gave them a title of nobility, and suddenly they became a duke. And you have pictures of your ancestors on the walls. True self-worth comes from a deeper place that is actually not related to achievement in this world, or whatever this world calls achievement, because that is delusion also. What is it that makes a successful life? Now, the world has a certain opinion about that. The mainstream culture. But that is a delusion too, because most humans who are considered highly successful are also unhappy. Burdened with a huge ego in many cases, making themselves and others unhappy in the process. True self-worth comes from that place of beingness. It comes from the I am. And it is not comparative. On the horizontal dimension in this world, your self-worth is always there. You need comparison. And to have a heightened sense of self-worth, you need to be better in some ways than others. You compare yourself to others, and that determines your sense of self-worth. Possessions, looks, knowledge, skills, all these things that you have, things that you can do, things that you know. Self-worth could be about all your knowledge in your mind that you have accumulated. So do you derive your self-worth from those things? And but it relies on comparison. Compared to others, one person says, I look much better. I look better. Not me, obviously, I'm just talking about my body is better than other bodies, my appearance. And you derive your self-worth from external appearance for a while, until time does something to it, as it will, unless you die first. But eventually time will erode the things that you identify with when your self-worth is derived from physical strength or physical appearance. And then eventually you shrink like an apple that you leave for too long on the kitchen counter. At first, the apple looks... and then you forget it in a corner of your kitchen counter, and then a few weeks later, it has shrunk. It's soft, it's what happened to it? Time did something to it. And it does that to your body too. So that's not a good thing to steer a sense of self-worth from, but it's very seductive, especially if you are blessed with a great body or great appearance. You have to be very careful because it's not going to last, and then you'll be very unhappy. Possessions. I have more than skills. I can do this better than other people. I have more knowledge. Compare, and then you get a heightened sense of self-worth through comparison. So you need to have a sense of self-worth. You need superiority in some area of your life to get that sense. So you have to rely on others being considered less worthy than you for your sense of self-worth. That's all to do. If you live exclusively on the horizontal dimension, that's how it works. And your sense of self-worth is very fragile, because there could always be others that, even in the area that you most identify with, there could always be others who are even better than you there, and they usually are. And the true self-worth is not comparative at all. It comes directly from the realization of the being that you are, which is precious. There's a sense of infinite worth or worthiness in there that does not depend on any comparison. It's life itself, the sacredness of life itself that you are. And success, ultimately, what is the only real success in life? It is how conscious you are, how much consciousness is manifesting, emerging, shining through you here and now. Not your historical past. Let's say that one or two of you have had a very bad life up to this point. Maybe every decision you've made has been wrong and it has led to disastrous consequences. Maybe you spent years in prison and then you got out and then you didn't succeed in that, and then you suffered and so on. But now you're here. For some reason, you're here. This is an extreme case. It probably doesn't apply to any of you, but I'm just giving an example of, let's say your total life up to this point has been a disaster in the eyes of the world, or maybe even in your own eyes. But now somehow you go, and here you begin to awaken, wow, to your essence identity. That is the only true success, your consciousness, your state of consciousness. And suddenly, the whole history of you was a preparation, although it looked like a total failure. It was a preparation for this awakening. And so retrospectively, this total failure of your personal history, it all made sense. You needed it to awaken. All the suffering that were perhaps inflicted on you by others, and then self-created suffering, all the suffering has brought you to the point of awakening. So retrospectively, suddenly, It was all good. It all made sense because it was obviously you needed it to awaken. That's success, not what the world tells you. So ways of knowing, the conceptual way of knowing is pretty useless for knowing who or what you are in the depths of your being, or to get even an inkling of what might be the deeper meaning behind the word God, to get a sense of what that might refer to. So your conceptual mind cannot really help you, although sometimes certain words that one uses can be helpful as pointers, but not as explanations. A word can point you in the right direction of non-conceptual knowing. So you can use a concept as a pointer towards non-conceptual knowing. For example, when I say stillness, the possibility of letting go of the stream of thinking and becoming still. And when you become still, thinking has subsided, but you haven't fallen asleep unless you're badly jet-lagged. Thinking has subsided, but you remain awake. And that state of wakefulness is awareness. When thinking subsides, awareness or presence, same thing, presence remains. That's very interesting, and that's an incredibly important skill. Until it becomes second nature, you could call it a skill to learn to step out of the stream of thinking, perhaps initially by being aware of your breathing. That stills the mind. And then there's a stillness that remains. That stillness is aware presence. And there you enter the field of true gnosis, Gnosis, the deeper knowing of your essential reality. And that is a non-conceptual knowing. That's the only knowing that you can use, can be helpful in trying to not understand God, because that's not possible, but to get a sense, a kind of realization of what that word actually means, the reality to which it points. But it's not only, as a little aside for a moment, it's not only knowing yourself, where the non-conceptual knowing is important. The non-conceptual knowing, to become familiar with that kind of knowing, is important even in this world. Knowing things in this world, again, you can know things through mental concepts, the screen of mental concepts, or you can know things more directly without conceptualization, a totally different way of knowing. And I emphasize that both are necessary for a human being. But in our civilization, most humans are completely lost in the conceptual reality. They can no longer, or very rarely, and many humans not at all, relate to this world without the screen of conceptualization, which is through thinking, immediately labeling everything that they experience, every sense perception, having a mental commentary about every sense perception. Oh, look at that tree, isn't that lovely? I wonder what it's called. Isn't that a tree that I saw last year in such and such a place? I wonder, blah, 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 blah. And now you don't even have to rely on your thinking. You get your phone out and say, let's see what this tree is. There's an app for it. There's an app that you take a photo and it tells you what the name of the tree. So you can go, oh, and that's I have that app, by the way, because sometimes it's quite nice to have. But if you're trapped in that, if you cannot relate to the tree in any deeper way than through concepts, that's very limiting. Ideally, you have both in your life, but I don't emphasize concepts because you have that already. Everybody has far more concepts than they need. Everybody is trapped in a conceptual reality. Humans yourself have made themselves into a conceptual entity, which is the ego, the narrative of me, which you call my life. So that learning this way of knowing that is non-conceptual, not learning it, rediscovering it, because before humans were excessively burdened by the conceptual mind thousands of years ago, they had a bit more access to this non-conceptual knowing. So when you look at a tree, trees are a wonderful example because they're such wonderful beings. And even on this huge property here, I've seen some amazing, in this case, yes, they have a name, olive trees. But so knowing that it is an olive tree does not necessarily mean that you're trapped in a concept. You know there's an olive tree, but you're not trapped in the concept. You're still able to then let go of the concept and then look at the tree. And be still while you look. Maybe you even touch it, but it's not necessary. You could. As long as there's nobody around, people might think you're weird. So you look at the tree and you're still at the same time. And then you can know the tree not through concepts, but you can sense the life of the tree. Now we are using into the realm of what is perhaps conventionally called mysticism, but that's just a word, but really means refers to a deeper knowing. But our civilization dislikes that because our civilization is dominated by conceptualization and the ego. There are egoic entities everywhere, not just individual egos, but egoic entities, like even at CNN is an egoic entity. Fox is an egoic entity, to talk about American TV station, in case you don't know. The political party is an egoic entity. A corporation is an egoic collective entity. They're everywhere. So you can sense the being of the tree. That sounds very weird. I'm sorry about that. You sense the aliveness, the being, the presence of the tree, and you know it in a much deeper way. And you know something, the tree that is deeper than what your senses tell you about the tree. Now, the ancient humans in almost probably all cultures and civilizations had more access to that dimension because the conceptual mind was not quite as developed, not as advanced, developed yet. So there was still some room for sensing, to knowing things at a deeper level. Let's go back to the tree. When you look at this tree and you're still, but so there is an intelligence there, but it's not what we conventionally call intelligence. There's a different kind of intelligence. And this is the beginning of wisdom, where intelligence turns into wisdom. Wisdom is associated with this deeper way of knowing that they go together, almost they're one almost. So you sense the aliveness of the tree, its beingness, and then you come to that what ancient cultures knew, and we have to use that word, and that's the fringe of God, so to speak. You sense the sacredness of the tree. You sense the sacredness of this life form. And you then, what arises then is a certain respect for the life form of the tree. In many ancient cultures, trees were considered sacred. And sometimes they chose particular trees that were particularly sacred. And often ceremonies, religious, spiritual ceremonies were performed where there were groves of trees, and people get drawn there because they could sense the energy field that emanates from those trees. Now, the modern human cannot sense that because the modern human only knows the tree through conceptualization. So we need both. It's good to know, sometimes it's helpful to know the name of the tree. It also can be helpful to know things about the tree, how it grows, how old it is. You can countless PhDs have been written about trees, I'm sure of that. And you can write new ones too. So there's a lot you can conceptually know and say, we don't know yet about the tree. You can ask all kinds of questions. How does the water get up into the high branches how does the tree pull up the water? I'm sure PhDs have been written about that and there's some answer. But that's all conceptual. So inviting the non-conceptual knowing into your life is very important. So one could say you disappear as a person, but you are there very powerfully as a presence. You disappear as a person temporarily, but in a very powerful way, there is a presence which you cannot define. And you then access this dimension that is one way of putting it. It's pure power, pure intelligence. Anything created arises out of that. And as you invite that into your life, it can and will transform even the way in which you live as a person. And that happens without you thinking that you need to transform yourself. A transformation happens even to the person, although the person obviously will always have certain limitations. You are good at this, but you're not good at that, and so on. The person obviously cannot be perfect there's always certain characteristics that define a person. It has form. That's understood. But that dimension, as you access that, flows into the conditioned entity that we call the person, and can use the personal mind and express itself through that. In other words, inspiration will happen more easily. Intuition happens more easily. A creative ability develops more easily. Obviously, you need to have some mastery, some expertise in some fields. Then it can this creative energy from the unconditioned realm of being or consciousness can flow into what you do and transform and empower it. Of course, you need to already, in the case of activity, you need to have already developed something that it can flow into. In my case, it cannot flow into becoming a fantastic swimmer or tennis player. It's not going to happen. It's not going to empower me on that level. And it's too late for that. Nor is it going to come up in me with the creative realization, finding the unified field theory in physics that Einstein unsuccessfully looked for, the unified field theory. It's not going to come through this mind, because the mind, this is not, it has not developed that particular avenue through which spirit or consciousness could express itself creatively. But it is expressing itself creatively through these words. So not through nuclear physics or sports. It can, in the case of this particular person, or whatever it may be, where people develop the great new, like Elon Musk, the latest thing about electric cars or whatever. I'm not going to be able to do that. This is not how the creative energy can express itself through me, nor I'm going to be a great dancer. It's much too late for that too. But you might. Or it might not be express itself in any of those ways too. It is possible that as you access that dimension, the power of now, as you access that dimension within yourself, it may not even express itself through some creative endeavor. It could be something else. It could be the way in which you relate to other humans. It affects everybody that you come in contact with. Perhaps you carry on with an ordinary activity, and yet a new energy comes into that. Let's say you have the simplest possible job. Let's say you're at a toll bridge where you have to pay. This came to mind just now because some time ago I was at a toll bridge where you drive there, you have to pay to use the road. It's toll, it's called. So you have to stop the car, and there's a man or woman in a little booth, and he or she says, $1, please, or whatever, and then you give. And there was one, I don't remember where it was, that person was, everybody felt better after paying the $1 because she was so present and there was an energy flowing through her that every person who went through, I imagine, must have felt better because that brief interaction, there was an outflow of loving kindness, metta, loving kindness, that comes out of this is another way in which presence manifests itself in this dimension. I've already mentioned creative things, creative endeavor can empower many things that you do, or it may just manifest itself as what we could call loving kindness that flows through you as you go about your normal business. Perhaps you haven't developed any particular avenue through which presence could express itself creatively, whatever it may be, sports, dance, science, musical instrument, all the various things. Maybe you haven't developed, maybe you could still develop it or not. It doesn't matter. In some way, presence will use you as a channel, and then something will flow through you into this dimension. And it could be just your presence itself can be a powerful tool of transformation in this dimension, so that this loving kindness flows through you into this world that affects everybody you come into contact with. So who knows how this will transform the way in which you experience life, but it will transform it. So when you bring together the human and the being, instead of just being a human, it's not enough being a human. It's a terrible fate if you only know yourself as a human. You have, in other words, zero self-transcendence. You are trapped in this limited little self. And even the big egos, they're little selves. If the egos, there are some people who seem to have achieved much in this world only through having a huge ego. That is possible, but the achievements are really not achievements at all, because they make countless people unhappy. So there's no point in building up some huge enterprise. And while you're doing it, you're not only unhappy yourself, you make everybody else unhappy too. That does not transform this world. One could say that everything that you perceive is a surface phenomenon. It's the surface of reality. And underneath your perceptions, there is a vastness, like the ocean. And whatever you're seeing is the surface of the ocean. So underneath that, there's a vastness of energy formations, ultimately the one consciousness expressing itself in these all very short-lived forms. And under the deeper you go, the stiller it becomes. This is probably what Plato talked about, the ancient Greek philosopher, that there are ideas in the unseen realm. There's the world of what is translated as ideas, but it's not a good translation. He said before things exist as a physical thing and come into existence, they already exist on an unseen level in the world of consciousness. And then the consciousness manifests as something or someone. The universe manifests briefly as you. And as you become conscious, in you, it is the universe that is becoming conscious. You're not, I mean, you think you are a person, and of course, in conventional terms, you are a person. But ultimately, you're not a person. It's absurd. What does that even mean? I mean, the word means a mask. Person comes from Latin, persona means mask. I mean, you're not a mask. You're not a person. What are you? Who are you? You're not separate from the universe. So you are an expression of the universe. You haven't fallen into this universe from someone, from somewhere. You've come out of this universe. And then you go back into it, and then you come out again as something else. You die, you're born. Oh, what's this all about? And then you. Oh, that wasn't a very nice life. Oh, this one is better. But it doesn't last. So the one consciousness appearing as the multiplicity of beings. So you are the awareness of the universe. You are the consciousness of the universe. How could you not be? And you can realize that even if you are living in a prison cell, and there may be someone at some point who listens to what I'm saying right now, in a prison cell, you can realize this, and it may not be pleasant, but even if you're in a prison cell, you can at least, more fundamentally, step out or become liberated from the prison of your mind. And that is a more fundamental prison than the prison cell that you are in. Even in a prison cell, and I've had correspondence from people in prison who said they feel free now. You can become free of being prisoner of your mind, and that's a far worse prison cell than the physical prison cell. And other people perceive that they are imprisoned in a body that is no longer functioning well. As your body if your body is not functioning properly anymore, then increasingly you may feel that you are trapped in your body. And that is, for some humans, that becomes an opportunity for going deeper and realizing that, in essence, they are the consciousness that animates the body, but they are not the body. And on the level of consciousness, there's no handicap, there's no dysfunction. So we touched upon this last night. When a great opportunity arises, when the world of form and the personal sense of self that identifies with the world of form becomes very dissatisfying. That's a great opportunity. In other words, taken completely out of your comfort zone. And then you are more motivated to awaken and to realize who you are in your essence. But the good thing is, you don't have to wait for that anymore, because you have consciously chosen, well, with a little bit of help from suffering, for most of you, your personal, so-called personal suffering has been the motivating factor that brought you here. Or perhaps you've suffered in another life and have come back and has said, oh, I did enough in my last lifetime. I'm ready to awaken already now. That's fine. And then most of you have reached the point of the end of suffering. And I'm speaking of the psychological suffering that is mind-produced. There is no other suffering. There is physical pain that exists, but the term suffering, in the way we use it, implies that there is a suffering entity, and it implies that there is mind, a mind-made sense of self that is not surrendered to life. And as the way I put it, humans need suffering to awaken, and suffering means they're confronted with the challenges of life. They're confronted with the problems of life. All the things that they dislike most in their lives are the most important thing in their lives. It's totally reversed. All the things that you think these things are making my life miserable, those are the very things that are most helpful for your spiritual awakening. And then that includes your ex-wife or ex-husband and people like that, because often life comes to you as people who are making your life miserable. Dogs, less so. You might get bitten by a dog, but it's unlikely that you have lived with a dog that made your life miserable, but it's very likely that you've lived with a human who made your life miserable, and probably with several. And then there are other things that were challenging: accidents, illnesses, loss of security, so-called. There's no security, it's just a loss of social function, perfect job, defeats, things that you tried and you were not successful, you did not succeed. And spiritually, failure is much more helpful than success, by the way. Or you succeeded greatly, and after a while it all collapsed. Or the success remained, but it became totally empty and meaningless. You achieved fame and wealth, and suddenly you were more unhappy than before. So spiritually, the most helpful things are those things that the ego judges as the most awful things in my life. And if you live in a false identity, a conceptual identity that you allow the world to tell you who you are, you allow the world to determine your worth, So you've stopped thinking, the ripple has stopped thinking, and in that at first there is a strange. I'm not thinking about who I am or my problems, and yet what is left here is just a presence. And that means the ripple is becoming aware of a transcendent dimension that is deep. And that is the awakening of the ripple. And that is actually the main purpose of your life, is to become aware of that, because that is the awakening of the human species. And the human species is only one manifestation of the consciousness of the universe, manifesting here as the human species. I'm sure there are others on other planets or galaxies who are also awakening. And your purpose is that you may sometimes question whether your life, there's this weird notion of how do you judge your life so far? A success, failure, something in between. And of course, it's nice to achieve something in this world, to create this or that. But it cannot tell you who you are. It always leaves a sense of lack ultimately behind, even if you can hang on to it until finally you die. And you have to let go, or it leaves you. Either you leave it or it leaves you, whatever it is. It leaves you or you leave it. And many things leave you before you die. Achievements too, especially in the age of reputation, can leave you, especially in the age of Twitter. One wrong tweet and your entire life is destroyed. And if you live in a false identity, a conceptual identity, that you allow the world to tell you who you are, you allow the world to determine your worth, you look to the world and other people to tell you that you are good. And if you allow the world to tell you that, then it's ultimately, you're trapped in a conceptual identity. That's me. And that can be destroyed. In the past, you had to do a little bit more to destroy your reputation. But nowadays, it's so easy. Just tweet something that and suddenly the hive mind will pounce on you, and you have to say, I'm sorry, and you can't show your face in public again anywhere. Exaggerating only slightly. But that's all it's so fragile because it's a fictitious sense of self. It's a surface I. But to lose your reputation, or to lose your possessions, or to lose your position, is a wonderful opportunity for realizing who you are beyond your position and your possession and your achievements. Some people need that. it's a blessing for them to lose. Not everybody needs it, but many people need to lose some things very significant in their lives in order to bring about, to initiate the awakening process. And retrospectively, many humans look back, they're really grateful that they lost this, which they regarded as irreplaceable and extremely valuable. And with that loss, they lost most important part of their identity. Was a fiction anyway, but they didn't know that. And that led to suffering, of course. So the loss of fictitious identity, which can happen to anybody, and to some people it doesn't happen until they retire. So maybe they had a particular job, title, and suddenly you pack your bags and you look forward to, okay, now I can start living, but then suddenly you realize you're nobody any beyond your job description and your function that you fulfilled for decades, perhaps an important function, member of the board. And suddenly you're not a member of the board, you're just bored. But you had been looking forward to the golfing, or there's a lot of golfing around here. Nothing against golf, can be wonderful meditation, but you'd been looking forward to the golfing, or whatever it is. You were now retired, and I can start living. And you do some golfing, and then you sit there, and then you do a bit more golf, or whatever it is. But who are you suddenly? You don't get these phone calls anymore, only very occasionally. And that this great sense of something missing arises. Oh, I'm nobody suddenly. Yeah, because your entire life, your entire identity was built upon a fiction, a conceptual edifice in your head, and everybody else confirmed its truthfulness, but it wasn't. So the loss can be a great help. Most of you are not in desperate need of a huge loss, or that might happen. The universe gives you what you need because you've already voluntarily come here. You have voluntarily embarked upon a course of, to put it in blunt and somewhat scary terms, a course of self-annihilation. But it was only the surface self. There was nothing real there. So when you, for example, especially now during the 6 months, when your practice is your inner state, the practice is becoming familiar with awareness, allowing awareness into your life, realizing that nothing is more important than that, and then the most important thing is you discover your ability to refrain from thinking. It doesn't have to be long at first, just not just when you're meditating, say, okay, now I'm going to do a meditation. That's fine, it's good. But there's much more to it. To refrain from thinking in ordinary situations, when thinking is not required, Simple thing like looking at flowers, looking at around the room. Do you have to think while you look around the room? Or can you look around the room without thinking? And who is looking when you're not thinking? Is the person looking when you have no labels for your perception? Or when you're listening to a bird, or the sound of the ocean, or the sound of rain, which may be coming tomorrow? When you're listening to that, and you're not labeling it mentally, you're not saying anything about it, but there's an alert listening. Who is listening? Are you then a person with a history and so on that's listening? Or is there a deeper I that has emerged and the sensory perception is happening against the background of or within the space of that deep I? So in that sense, you could say the universe is listening to itself. And there is let's say there's the bird song, or there is the crushing of the waves, or there's the sound of the rain. And suddenly, that listening is an enormous addition to the universe. The universe is awakening to itself, its own depth, its own beauty, through you. But you can only fulfill that function as part of the totality, the function of the awakening universe, if you're not excessively burdened and excessively trapped in your personalized sense of self. And because otherwise you carry the burden of yourself, the surface self, the little self, but the little self can feel very huge. It occupies your entire mental and emotional space. And it thinks about itself, and it talks about itself, and it worries about itself. I am the most important thing in the universe. He's me and the rest of the universe. Oh dear. And now how do you become free of, how do you step out of this being the trap, the prison of the self, as the Buddha just called it, the self. Jesus also called it the self. It's not a very well known fact because they don't understand it in the churches, most of them. Some may do, but they don't understand when he said, deny yourself. Jesus said, deny yourself. Deny thyself in the old translation. Meaning, obviously, you're not supposed to deny something that is real. The implication when Jesus says deny thyself is obviously that the self is not real. Why would he ask you to deny something that is real? Would not make sense. And so the Buddha, of course, always pointed to the fictitious nature of the self. Buddha said, self is an illusion. And as long as you are trapped, I'm paraphrasing the Buddha now, as long as you are trapped in the illusion of the self, you will encounter dukkha, translated as suffering, sometimes translated as misery or translated as unhappiness. Suffering, misery, unhappiness, unsatisfactoriness. When you are trapped in that ultimately illusory self, you continuously generate dukkha, which is from the Pali language, which is related to Sanskrit, meaning suffering, unhappiness, unsatisfactoriness. And wherever you go, whatever situation you go into, whatever relationship you go into, whatever place you go to, whatever attainment, whatever you attain or achieve or get, there's always, sooner or later, and usually sooner, you will encounter the element of dukkha. In other words, it gets tainted with unhappiness. And so the Buddha, that was the teaching of the Buddha, said wherever you go, you'll find dukkha. But why? Because you take something that you are not to be real and ultimately who you are. And so that felt is a fiction. And therefore Jesus said, deny thyself, meaning not deny the reality of yourself, meaning recognize the unreality of yourself. That's the significant meaning of deny thyself. Recognize the unreality. That is a denial of the self. So to completely rest within yourself, completely come to the doing needs to come to a stop, but you cannot make that stopping into a doing, because then, okay, I need to stop my doing mode. That's more doing. Can you speak about how to be in this world with this constant push for connectivity on the internet without feeling that being present is another thing to do? You can make a list of things to do, answer emails, check Facebook, make these 4 or 5 phone calls, write the report, call your stockbroker, therapist, whatever. And number 7, be present. Yes, it's a good question. The being present isn't something, although sometimes when we talk about it, it sounds as if it were something that you do. In the same way that when people meditate, many of you probably have a meditation practice, and there's that sense that, okay, now I have to do my meditation. It might even be on your list of things to do. But the very idea that you are now doing a meditation can be an obstacle to doing an actually effective meditation, because you're still doing something. And so even while you sit and whatever the technique is, it could be that there's still that sense of doing, and even there could even be a remnants of stress there, because you're doing, but you also know that there are many other things that you still have to do, but now you really have to do this meditation. I'm doing it. Don't disturb me, I'm doing it. I'm trying to do a meditation. I'm trying. But I have so much on my plate to... So the very sense that you're doing something can be the obstacle, because we could say that meditation, or being present, is the realization of being. That's always already there, but just not realized. So it's not doing at all. It's the other dimension, in which there's no doing, but there's being. And that is the fundamental dimension. Ultimately, there can be no doing without being. Being is the unconditioned consciousness. So to completely rest within yourself, completely come to the doing needs to come to a stop, but you cannot make that stopping into a doing, because then, okay, I need to stop my doing mode. That's more doing. But if your approach is just be with what is completely, nothing to do, nothing to achieve, nowhere to go, just being here, aware of whatever appears in that space of awareness, and, if possible, and it is possible, aware that you are aware. That's it. So there's no doing. So you've gone into being, realized being. It was always there and is always there. It's just overlooked continuously because of a certain state of consciousness in which the thinking mode has become so overwhelming that you have lost touch with the deeper dimension within yourself. Now, when I say lost touch, does that imply that once when I say you, I mean humanity, or you, does that mean that once you were in touch with that dimension, perhaps you were in touch with that as a baby until you started to think? But you went, if that is the case, you were in touch with it unconsciously, you didn't know it. It was a natural state. But it seems that if you go back into prehistory, humanity, in many traditions and ancient civilizations, there is a myth of the golden age. Once we had that. In the Old Testament, it's written of as paradise or the Garden of Eden. And there are other myths from different parts of the world, including India and so on, of the myth of a very distant past when the suffering wasn't there, the unhappiness wasn't there. It was the golden age. Is that just a story, a wishful thing? Or is it some very distant memory of a different state of consciousness? And I would suggest that it is a very distant memory of something that we kind of lost. That's not absolutely correct word. But it does not mean that those ancient humans in prehistory necessarily, well, we know very little about anything that goes beyond 3,000 years ago, and that's little. But it seems that humans lived in connectedness with the source because the mind had not yet started to produce thoughts, or only very rudimentary thoughts. And they were still able to rest in the being, in the same way that a cat or a dog, I'm using those two because many of you have observed them, because you have lived with them, when they rest completely. And you can become, if you contemplate a cat at rest, it can help you to actually become still, or a dog, and to go completely, even if they're not asleep yet, they're just some years ago I saw a movie, I think it was called 1 Million Years BC. It's just a ridiculous title, as if 2,000 years made a difference in 1 million years. But it was called 1 million years BC, and you saw these transitional beings between animal and human. They're already walking, and they're already producing certain sounds, but not yet words, or just very rudimentary sounds that are beginning to represent things. And then they got into a fight between two tribes, still making partly animal-like sounds. And then the fight comes to an end, a few get killed, And in the evening they sit around the fire, and it's done very well. I don't know if the rest of the movie is any good, but I just remember that particular scene. They sit around the fire. They have already they've discovered how to make fire. That's an amazing thing. And they sit around the fire, and instead of talking, because they haven't got language about what just happened an hour ago, they just sit and they're completely just at rest. They sit around the fire and they all go, No nervous excitement left because it's not being kept alive by the mind and the memory. So they're rooted, again, they return, they're rooted in being. And that's every animal is more deeply connected, has still a deeper connection with being, but it's an unconscious connection. It doesn't know anything else. It's a natural state. And it's quite likely that humans once had that in their evolutionary journey. And then they started to think, which wasn't a bad thing. It was an amazing thing that they began to think. That was just associated with the creation of language, of course, also. And that's an amazing thing. When they discovered they could produce certain sounds to represent things. Amazing. And then they could produce sounds to represent activities. And then they began to realize they were having these sounds in their head too. They were beginning to hear thoughts in their head. And some anthropologists believe that, not everybody agrees, they believe that at that time humans mistook the arising thoughts as gods talking to them. So they heard their own thoughts and said, "Oh, what do you want me to do?" And said, "Kill that neighboring tribe." Okay, you must kill them. And then perhaps the first time a few humans experienced sleepless nights. And that was just the beginning. But it was an amazing evolutionary step forward. This entire civilization, many civilizations arose out of that, an amazing thing. But there was a huge price to pay. There's always a price to pay in this world of opposites. There was a huge price to pay for that. And we all know what that is. It's loss of connectedness with the source. You are alienated from the source, unhappy. Somebody sent me a sticker to put on the car. I haven't put it on my car yet. A very wise sticker. I don't know where it originated. It says, "You don't need to believe every thought you think." Now, Stephen Mitchell, fortunately, does not exclusively use the masculine pronoun as it's done in most other translations. He, the master, he varies between she and he. So sometimes the master is seen as feminine, and sometimes the master is seen as masculine, which is a wonderful thing, since the Tao has many qualities that are closely related to the feminine, the openness, and so on. There are many images in the Tao Te Ching that are feminine images to point to the essential nature of the Tao. Not that the Tao itself is feminine, but to get a feeling for what Tao is, the Tao Te Ching uses feminine imagery. So here we have a few lines about the master. The master
keeps her mind always at one with the Tao. That is what gives her her radiance. The Tao is ungraspable. How can her mind be at one with it? Because she doesn't cling to ideas. The Tao is dark and unfathomable. How can it make her radiant? Because she lets it. Since before time and space were, the Tao is. It is beyond is and is not. How do I know this is true? I look inside myself and see. Let's look at it again and see. The Master keeps her mind always at one with the Tao. That is what gives her her radiance. Keeps her mind at one with the Tao. In the next line it says, if it's ungraspable, how can her mind be at one with it? And it says, because she doesn't cling to ideas. Interesting. She doesn't cling to ideas. That reminds me of a famous Zen saying. I don't remember who said it, but a Zen master said it. Don't seek for the truth. Just cease or stop cherishing opinions. That is, I believe, points to the same inner state of disidentification from thinking. She doesn't cling to ideas. Cling to. It doesn't mean she doesn't have ideas, the Master. But the Master does not cling to ideas. And the Zen Master, when he said, don't look for the truth, just stop cherishing opinions. He didn't say, stop having opinions, just as Lao Tse does not say, don't have ideas. It says, don't cling to ideas. And the other master says, stop cherishing opinions. So this clinging, which is the same as cherishing, is self-identification with thoughts that arise. In other words, you then believe completely in every thought that comes into your head. Amazing. You believe in it, that means you are it. That is self-identification with thinking. So, how then to be at one, always at one with the Tao? So simple. On the one hand, you could call it stop cherishing opinions. Now, any thought that arises ultimately is an opinion, you could say. Stop cherishing, stop your self-identification with that. Or don't cling to ideas, in the words of Lao Tse, or this present translation here. So that there's always a space between you and your thoughts, that you are, or rather, you are not the thought, you are the space for the thought. This is how I put it sometimes. You're familiar with that, and perhaps in yourself you know it. You don't have to be in your thoughts, but you can be the space for your thoughts. Then no matter how weird your thoughts are, it doesn't matter that much. You don't say, oh my God, I shouldn't be having these weird thoughts. No, because that's another thought. I'm supposed to be spiritually advanced, and why am I still having these thoughts? There must be something wrong with me. Does that sound familiar? That's also thoughts. That's more thoughts that say, I shouldn't be having these thoughts, there's something wrong with me. And then you believe in those thoughts. Thoughts that judge other thoughts. That may sound familiar to some of you. And there's nothing personal in it, it's the human mind. So you don't need to eliminate thoughts or to say, I should only have pure thoughts because I'm a spiritual person. Because by now I should have transcended all impure thoughts. Well, then you're in a dilemma, because in this world of polarities, if you only want to have pure thoughts, you're creating the other polarity in the unseen. And sooner or later, the other polarity will come up from behind, creep up. And this has been done sometimes by Christians who try to practice the teachings of Christ without entering the state of consciousness out of which that comes. So they try to be pure and spiritual and good Christians and denied the other polarity, repressed it, and then suddenly they get overpowered by something deeply destructive and negative. So you have these occasions, you have a nice, wonderful person who always talks in spirituals, just so and spiritual. And before you know it, he's screaming at his wife, or even hitting his wife. Where did that come from? And he can't even admit to himself that this is what's happening. And so if you push away certain thoughts because they do not fit into the mental image of who you are, as this or that, then they get to assume a life of their own. And before you know it, they invade your mind again, if only in your dreams, and suddenly you have dreadful nightmares. But during the day, you're such a spiritual person, and at night you suddenly have dreadful nightmares. Monsters come, or you become a monster. Oh my God, this shouldn't be happening. And that's because you're pushing something away. The true spiritual does not lie in one thought or another thought. It lies in being there as the space for your thoughts. Then it doesn't matter anymore, really. Whatever thought arises is no more than that. It's a form that arises at this moment. You don't resist it. You don't need to resist it. But you're the space for it. You don't become it. Somebody sent me a sticker to put on the car. I haven't put it on my car yet. A very wise sticker. I don't know where it originated. It says, you don't need to believe every thought you think. So this is the practice then of being the space or the witness for your thoughts rather than being the thought. And you can practice with your opinions. Many thoughts are all thoughts could be called opinions, but there are certain things that are definitely, clearly recognizable as opinions when you are talking to people every day, when you're having a discussion or talk with friends or colleagues or neighbors. So they will express their opinion, whatever it may be about, and you may express your opinion. And you can then observe whether or not there is self-identification with your opinion. And your opinion, of course, is a mental position. the position of the mind. Are you identified with the mental position? If you are, then you are cherishing opinions, in the words of the Zen master, or you are clinging to ideas, in the words of Lao Tse. And how do you know that? You know that when, as you discuss things, you become either defensive or aggressive in the expression of your opinion. Emotion flows into, and you get worked up in, why is that happening? Why are you becoming defensive or aggressive? And of course you have to look inside yourself to see whether this is the case or not. Are you becoming defensive or aggressive? You feel the influx of emotion. And why is this happening? Because unconsciously you feel threatened by somebody who attacks or questions or contradicts your mental position. Why do you feel threatened by somebody who questions your mental position? That is a sign that you had identified with the mental position. And identified means your sense of self was in it. So the person is not attacking your opinion in your unconscious viewpoint. The person, you're being attacked in your very life is under attack because you identified this. This is not true, but this is how it is perceived, as if they were attacking your very existence, because you identified with the mental position. There was a self in it. So anybody who questions it questions your very existence. It's an unconscious process. So that's an amazing thing to realize in yourself, and it's a deep-seated unconscious pattern in most human beings. And of course, as you become conscious of that, you can usually see it much more clearly in others, more easily, in your friend or whoever you're having, than in yourself. Usually says, oh, yes, that's what he always does. Of course, now I understand what my husband or my wife does. I understand completely. That's step one.
So part of this is, of course, to give more attention to the present moment, because the more you think, the more future you generate. And the more attention you give to the present moment, the less thinking. Because to be really present, you don't think about it, you just are with it, give it attention. I recommend the little things of life to be more attentive to all the little things that make up every hour of every day, every minute, every hour, and give them more attention. Walking steps, one step at a time. Objects that you're handling, all the time you're handling objects in your life. You're always touching something, putting something here and there. Is everything that you handle just a means to an end, or are you able to just appreciate the simple presence or even of a so-called inanimate object? Contemplation also of all the lovely things that make up your environment, part of your environment. For example, if I were sitting here alone, let's say I'm waiting for everybody to arrive, I might be sitting here looking, of course, at the flower, sense the stillness, and then there's a glass table here, and then there's a glass of water here, and there's a clock and a bell and tissues, and they all reflect the light in different ways. There's a little bit of a rainbow effect in the glass of water here, and then the lights are reflected on the bells, almost like a mirror, and there's the clock ticking away. It's a beautiful scene. Sometimes you go to an art gallery, well, not so much with modern art, but a very favorite thing would be still life artists. And it took a while in art before they discovered the artists in the history of art, before they discovered the seemingly insignificant things and started to give attention to those. Before that happened, they were very much interested in the huge things, the saints or the kings or the huge battle scenes or the big, they painted those things, or the important people, or some dramatic thing, volcanic eruption or whatever, a fire. And then at some point they started to discover the beauty and the incredible sense of the quality that is in the little things. They started painting, for example, simple people. The Dutch artists, perhaps I'm not that knowledgeable about artists, but the famous Dutch paintings show it's not so much big, important people. They show simple people, a woman in the kitchen baking bread, simple people sitting around the table eating a very simple meal, and there's the light, incredible light effects light comes through the window, and there's an incredible sense of presence and aliveness in the painting. And this is a scene that in normal life you would never have, unless you're really very conscious. Nobody would have stopped and said, "Oh, isn't that amazing? These people are sitting around a table eating a simple meal, and there's light coming through the window." Nobody would have done that. Perhaps after these artists depicted relatively seemingly insignificant things, perhaps it motivated some people to give more attention to that. But even now, it's still, people very much overlook that, and you overlook then a large part of your life. You don't give it attention. When I say give attention, there's an element of appreciation of everything, of the little things. And you begin to realize that your entire life consists mainly of little things. Even if you're a VIP, it still consists mainly, you're always sitting somewhere, standing somewhere, looking around, handling things, going from here to there, either on a bus or your private jet. And this giving attention, that is sometimes called gratitude. That's kind of part of it, this appreciation. But I don't necessarily use the word gratitude too often, because it implies that you say to somebody, "Oh, thank you." But there's a simple appreciation of the isness of things, of their presence. So you no longer regard almost continuously your entire environment as a means to an end. And what's the end? You need to get to some future moment where suddenly everything is going to be better than now. And so you're always on your way. It's a stepping stone to the next moment, and every object that you handle has only utilitarian value, but has no value in itself, is never appreciated for its beingness. And then you do the same to human beings. They only regarded, what can they do for me now? How do they fit into my schemes, into my plans? Because there's a future orientation continuously, which is the mind. Because there is no future. It's created by the mind. It becomes extremely enjoyable to be contemplating the little things that surround you. Then there is something, yes, there is an element of gratitude that comes with it. This appreciation is an element of you appreciate the sense-perceived world. This is an aspect of reality. It's not the deepest aspect of reality, but it is the surface of the ocean, and it's beautiful. And that also means it's not just when you are quietly contemplating, it's also when you're going from A to B to perform some action, you're going to buy something, going to the, whatever it is, post office. Appreciate the journey and every step of the journey, and look around so that the 10 minutes of going to the shop or driving to the shop or taking your bicycle to the shop isn't completely wasted and reduced to means to an end. And you can actually, that every moment is significant. And ultimately, it's only ever the one moment. And then this waiting game comes to an end, waiting for the big break. That's an expression. I don't know what breaks, but waiting for whatever it is. Of course, you have a goal. You may have a goal in life, and you're moving towards it. But in the meantime, this is now, and you know you're moving towards it. It becomes very enjoyable to be wherever you are when you have this ability to contemplate the little things, both when you're passively contemplating or when you are moving, in being engaged with things.
My question is on karma. I grew up in a Hindu family, and often karma is talked about as something that provides a balance in the world, but it can sometimes seem rigid, and it's a powerful influence over someone's life. And when I listen to you speak, I feel so much peace and so much hope. And you talk about presence and being as the keys to enjoying form and creating positive circumstances in your life or softening circumstances. And I wanted to know how karma fits into all of that, because there seems to be places in the world where there's not a lot of resources, where there's a lot of brutality. For example, I met somebody at work, and she was a refugee from Afghanistan, and she was a young girl. And the interpreter had told me that her brother and her father were killed in front of her, and she had another brother taken. And then I later learned that a lot of times the Taliban doesn't take the young boys to fight. They take them and they use them as sex slaves. And when I hear about stories like this, I just wonder how I can stay aligned with love or trusting the universe when I'm not able to see through your eyes yet? And how do you hold both?
Thank you. Thank you. Now, of course, everybody is born into a certain external environment and also is born with certain predispositions. They may be partly genetic, they may be other things, that a person is born with certain patterns, in other words. We don't need to examine where they come from, but just to see the fact that the human being is first of all born into a certain environment, which may be violent, or it may be relatively peaceful, and the person is born with inner patterns. You inherit certain, even pain body is partly inherited. Some babies cry a lot. They have a relatively heavy pain body already in this world. It doesn't mean they're spiritually less advanced. The opposite may be the case. There's no knowing. Other babies are relatively peaceful. And so there's a whole set of conditioning that happens. You come into the environment with certain predispositions, then the environment conditions you further, and in all that there's no choice involved. There's just influences. And so you find yourself in this world with certain unconscious patterns that have become the conditioning of who the person is, the unconscious conditioning. So karma, as I see it, is the unconscious conditioning that runs your life. And that still applies to many humans. And karma is partly collective, you've been born into it, and partly personal, they come together. So really you can only understand karma not as an abstract subject external to yourself, because then you get into belief systems and philosophy. We're not going that way. You can only understand karma by observing yourself, and by observing, and then you'll know many other things. But you need to, really, if you want to understand karma, you need to look at yourself. And so I began to understand what karma is when there was something arose that was not part of karma at all. And really, here we come to the key. The arising of consciousness or presence or a spiritual awakening is not part of karma. It is another dimension that breaks into the karmic realm. So you do not become awakened by accumulating, as they sometimes say in the East, good karma. That's fine on this level. You can make the walls or the furniture in your prison a little bit more comfortable. But there is something totally from beyond karma that can come into your life at any point within the wheel of karma and rebirth. Rebirth is, of course, part of karma. The deeper meaning of rebirth is identification with form. We don't need to even believe in transmigration or whatever. You can look at rebirth in your own life. Every time you identify with a thought that arises, which is form, you are born into that thought. Because you identify, your sense of self is in it. That's karma. You're reborn. Karma then is unconscious identification with these patterns that you have inherited, the conditioned. Complete identification of consciousness with the conditioned patterns. So consciousness is dreaming, one could say. This is why we use the word awakening in many spiritual traditions. Consciousness is awakening. Consciousness is in a dreamlike state when you identified with the unconscious patterns. And then you are condemned to rebirth. In fact, many times every day, you are reborn into and a reaction, an emotional, mental reaction. No presence at all, just rebirth into some form. Or you're reborn into thoughts that arise, and you completely believe in every thought. And then you act from those thoughts and emotions, and the action creates further reactions, and the actions confirm to you that you were right. If you have certain mind patterns about, for example, that other people are basically dishonest, just one example of people. People are so dishonest, they're all trying to get something from me. That tends to confirm itself in your life experience. You can try it out, or you may have experienced it before you became more conscious. That habitual thought patterns that you identified with, and that is karma, creates in the external confirmation that it is correct. So if you think the world is full of evil people, you will meet many evil people. And in other words, unconscious people. And even people who are on the break or who are halfway between conscious and unconscious, when you come together with them, your belief will pull them into unconsciousness. And that's karma. So karma is the complete absence of conscious presence, and so it's automatic. It plays itself out. And time does not free you of karma. That is a misperception, that if you only have enough time, eventually you can become free of karma. Karma renews itself and repeats itself. It's a wheel. And so the only thing that can free you of karma is the arising of presence. And why? How is it that for some person presence arises? I cannot tell you why. I only know that at any point in the wheel of karma, presence can come in. It can happen to this. It can happen to a criminal in prison, condemned to death. It can happen to somebody who has never heard of anything spiritual. It can happen to somebody who has been meditating for 30 years, or not happen to the same person who has been meditating for 30 years. So, in your own life, I can see from what you're saying that presence has already, I can sense that, presence has already come into your life. And presence frees you from karma, not all at once. Karma has an enormous momentum, meaning the patterns in yourself, the thought patterns, the emotional patterns, the reactive patterns. There's enormous momentum behind that. But as presence arises, gradually karma diminishes, the energy behind it diminishes. And gradually you experience a fading out of those patterns. They become weaker. You're no longer completely in the grip of those patterns. So as presence arises, there's a gradual fading out of karma. Not that it matters that much anymore, because once you are present, you can, as the previous questioner said, when we were talking about certain thoughts still arising, certain negative thoughts, that's still part of the karma, the old patterns, the unconscious habit patterns inherited. They still arise, but it's no longer problematic, and they no longer cause the suffering that they would have caused before, because they are seen in the light of awareness. So the light of awareness arises, and in the light of awareness, the patterns no longer dominate your life. They no longer run your life. And if occasionally it happens that the patterns do take over, then after a little while your presence returns and you say, well, there it was again. Pain body is part of karma, which may be strong in some people, not so strong in others. And so as presence arises, you are freed from karma. And then you have another completely different factor coming into your life. And so, for example, for a person to become free of collective karma, you need a considerable amount of presence for that to come in, to remove, and it then will remove you in one way or another, either internally, you find yourself completely free, you might still live in a violent society, but internally you would be free. There is a possibility you can have a holy man or woman living surrounded by violence. It's possible. It's rare, but possible. Or very often it happens that life removes you out of there and you find yourself somewhere else. So let's say vast collective karma, for example, in the case of, let's say, you have the Taliban there, you have all kinds of unconscious movements, you had Soviet communism, you had National Socialism in Germany, and for a person being born into that and not being drawn into that unconsciousness requires considerable presence. So not that many people, for example, in Germany, when Hitler came to power, not many people were able to remove themselves. Some were, some artists, some writers, they left, they could see what was happening, and they were strong enough not to be identified with the collective when there had been a tradition of obedience to authority for hundreds of years, a tradition of following your leader, and so on. To take yourself out of that, collective karma requires considerable presence, but some people had it. So it is our destiny then to go beyond karma by being the receptacles for presence. All you can do to be helpful in this world and help others is those people that you come into contact with. Everybody in this who is awakening will find that sooner or later they become a kind of teacher to others. And what a spiritual teacher does, the teacher points out the possibility of awakening out of identification with unconscious patterns, which means the spiritual teacher teaches you to go beyond karma.